you shouldn't overdo it. This is East Germany. There are specific reasons why East Germany votes for that. And this is in no way representative of the whole of Germany. Germany isn't turning into a Nazi state again. But it is a dangerous the first time this has happened since 1945. And the big question now is what this kind of earthquake and shock that it has been, if you look into the German papers this morning, what that will do to the national debate and how much it will undermine the stance of the mainstream parties and especially of the Christian conservatives who are in danger of learning the wrong lessons.
Quiet Riot.
Hello, Quiet Rioters. This is Alexandro. There is a post-Brexit tendency for news from continental Europe to be filtered through Brexit by much of the press still. Any success or solution is muted, any failure or difficulty amplified, as if our closest allies and biggest trading partners doing badly is somehow soothing. But yesterday something significant did happen in Germany that is difficult to overstate. The Bild greets the news with a simple AfD beben, AfD quake. And the front page of the Frankfurter Rundschau is even more stark. Eine Zäsur, a turning point. Still, there is a context even to these stories, and light and shade to be found in them. And to help me get behind the headlines, I have the London bureau chief for the ARD, the German equivalent of the BBC, the multi-award-winning filmmaker, author and journalist, the peerless Annette Dittert. Welcome to Quiet Riot, Annette.
Thank you so much for having me.
Annette, I think the first thing that needs to be clarified here is that we're not talking about Reform UK. British perspectives tend to shift the far right of other countries onto a template of our political landscape. Björn Höcke, the AfD's leader in Thuringia, and many believe the real leader of the AfD movement, who a court in 2019 decided was not libelous to call a fascist, and who was just convicted for the second time of using Nazi slogans. This is someone who advocates, and I quote, a large-scale remigration project built on a policy of well-tempered cruelty. And he has been designated a right-wing extremist by security services in Germany. So can you adjust a little bit the British perspective to what we mean when we say the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland?
Yes, I think the AfD is much more dangerous than Reform in the UK, and even more dangerous and more extremist than Le Pen and Meloni, at least as they present themselves, which has led Le Pen to throw out the AfD out of their European group, because Le Pen thought the AfD is too extreme even for her. So that's sort of what you have to keep in mind when you think about AfD. It's certainly the most right-wing, far right-wing extremist party in Europe at the moment, and too much in your face while they are trying to detoxify their far-right parties. So that's for a start. And then the regional branches where the AfD has now won these huge election victories yesterday, they both have been classified as the most extremist in Germany by the domestic security agencies. So we're talking about a really right-wing extremist party that is way better set up strategically, has better organized than Reform, and in my opinion, way more dangerous than what has been happening in the UK.
Oh, so the sort of East German chapters, I guess, of the AfD are even on the fringes of the AfD.
Yes, and that's why it's so worrying.
Wow.
Because in Thuringia you have the AfD more or less openly cooperating with proper neo-Nazi parties who have programs that are reminiscent of Nazi paroles. And Björn Höcke himself has repeatedly shouted out Nazi paroles. He has been fined for that twice. He still does it in a hidden way. So he just starts the sentence and then the audience finishes it. So this is, in a way, especially in Thuringia and Saxony, partly also a revisiting of the Nazi past without having this kind of taboo about it anymore my generation in West Germany grew up with.
Yeah, and it's important, I guess, historically to say that Thuringia especially is the first state parliament in which Adolf Hitler
Yes.
established a sort of foothold in power. So it will be extra meaningful, I think, to Germans.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that was in 1932, a year before Hitler nationally won. He had his first electoral breakthrough in Thuringia. So this always has been a stronghold of fascism, if you like. And in a way, this is obviously symbolic that it happens again in Thuringia so many years, not so many years after that, in a way. And this has been much talked about over the last days as well here in Germany. On the other side, one must not forget that Thuringia has 2 million people. I mean, the population in Thuringia and also in Saxony, so both together, do not even form 8% of the German population. So what has happened there yesterday, and I think that's important to stress, is not representative of the whole of Germany, although this will radiate far into the rest of Germany. This will have huge implications for the national elections next year. So it is very worrying, but you always have to keep in mind, this is not the whole of Germany that voted that way. This is let's say 8% of the overall population.
Now, can you explain just very loosely, what are the elections that just took place, the Landtags? Are they like our local and mayoral elections, or are they more like Holyrood, Stormont, Senedd elections?
It's a bit difficult to compare because Germany is a federal state, a properly federal state. So Germany is composed of different states, Länder we are calling it. And these Länder have all, like Holyrood, its own parliament. So it's state parliaments, not local election as such. So it's something in between. And it's meaningful because the Länder, the states, have far more to say within their regions than local mayors, for example, have in Britain, or even the Scottish Parliament. In a way, they're more important because Germany is a proper federal state, and also a victory of that scale of the far right will, of course, further destabilize the current government, which, by the way, totally imploded. The parties of the current coalition government have together not even made 10% in each state.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the results. First of all, Thuringia. What was the result there, the shape of it?
In Thuringia, the AfD, and again, the most extremist branch of the AfD, right-wing extremists, managed to secure a real victory, came in first with 32.8 is the current end result percentage of the vote. It's as it's a representative voting system, proportional representation, and that's the most worrying thing. As they managed to secure more than 30%, they have now a so-called blocking minority. And that means that they can block every important, crucial decision that requires a 2/3 majority of legislators, including changes to the state's constitutions, including changes or new elections of constitutional judges. And that means that Björn Höcke is able to govern while he is not governing, because the CDU, the only mainstream conservative party who survived, has clearly said that they won't touch on the AfD. They won't negotiate with them, because they have set up a so-called firewall before the elections. That means the AfD, although having won clearly in Thuringia, will not form any kind of government, but will be hugely influential by being able to block quite a few important decisions.
The other result was in Saxony. What happened there?
In Saxony, the only surviving mainstream party, the CDU, the Conservative Party, if you like, it's something like the Tories before Brexit. Still,
yes, the Christian Democrats.
The Christian Democrats. They managed to come in first, but really just so, with 1% more than the AfD. So they are the biggest party, which is a bit less worrying than what happened in Thuringia, but still it will be extremely difficult, even here, for the CDU to form a government, even with them being the election winner, because having excluded to negotiate with the AfD, there isn't much left, because the other mainstream democratic parties have all come in with so little percentage that they won't be a sufficient partner for the CDU, for the Christian conservatives. So the only option they have left now is to form a coalition or a government or whatever kind of agreement with the new rising populist star on Germany's political skies, with Sarah Wagenknecht, who is equally not a democratic party.
Yeah, it's a very weird thing, isn't it? The BSW, which is this new party that has, I would say, primarily cannibalized votes from Die Linke, from the left. They are quite a strange mix in that they have quite left-leaning economic policies, but they're socially extremely conservative, very anti-immigration. It's like they've taken their favorite features from the far left and the far right and formed this very populist party. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, absolutely. It's always, for me, a bit rather misleading when Wagenknecht is described in the British press as far left or just not as dangerous as the AfD. Because what she does, she is an unusually charismatic woman and very intelligent. And what she does is insidiously merging far right with far left topics and tropes, only to create a wholly new toxic brew-up of slogans that are directly tapping into the specific frustrations of East Germans. And other than most Germans had initially hoped, her new party did not eat into AfD's vote share. But the opposite happened. Far from being a bulwark against the AfD, Wagenknecht has turned out to be a resentment machine that rather has paved the way for far-right thinking from the sidelines by basically routinely normalizing anti-democratic narratives. So in a way, I find her way more dangerous, especially also, and that's something that has also been overlooked a lot outside of Germany. She is pro-Putin and wants Germany to immediately end military support for Ukraine, which is another thing that will be very problematic if the CDU, the Christian conservatives, have to form a government or some kind of whatever alliance with her, because that is directly opposing their policy.
Quiet Riot.
Yes, I wanted to ask about that. Both the AfD and this new BSW, they have a pro-Putin stance in common.
Mm-hmm.
And even the CDU in Saxony was making some, maybe we should think a little bit about the situation in Ukraine noises.
Yes.
So is this likely to become a big issue in the next general election?
This will become a big issue. This has already become a big issue. Olaf Scholz, the Social Democratic Chancellor of Germany, has already, before these elections last week, made allusions that maybe Germany will support Ukraine a little bit less to help his social democratic partners in these two states before the election, which I thought was a major mistake. The CDU has normally, the national CDU has a very clear stance on Ukraine and wants Ukraine to win, even clearer than the Social Democrats in government at the moment. But this might change now, because the local CDU Christian conservative leaders have indeed pandered to Sarah Wagenknecht and to the far right in so much as saying, yeah, well, maybe that's not the right thing to do, because in East Germany, for reasons that would probably take another hour to explain, there is a huge fear of Russia and this feeling that Germany shouldn't put so much money into Ukraine. And Wagenknecht has really tapped into that by saying that Putin was provoked by NATO into the war of Ukraine. That wasn't his choice, and really spreads this narrative of the far right again, saying that we shouldn't support Ukraine, we need the money at home, and also it's not our business, and Putin is a good guy. I mean, what Sarah Wagenknecht really wants, and that's why I personally think she's more dangerous even than the AfD, because she's hiding it better, is to extricate Germany from its Western alliances.
Yeah.
She is anti-EU, she is anti-NATO, which is also an old East German thing. I mean, that's what that generation grew up with. Anti-Americanism and anti-NATO, and that's what she's spreading, and that's something that's familiar to many East Germans, and she has a very good feel for that. And if this leads the Christian conservatives to loosen their stance on Putin and Ukraine, then that this will have huge implications for the whole stance of the EU as well towards Ukraine, because Germany has so far always been the country that has not only put in most military and financial supply, but has been very clear in supporting Ukraine against Putin, also because this is also not just about supporting a country that has been attacked and invaded, but because that's about maintaining and supporting the idea and the concept of liberal democracy that Wagenknecht does not see as her major priority.
The other thing I wanted to light upon a little bit was that according to ZDF, 36% of under 30s voted for AfD in Thuringia, for instance.
Yeah.
Again, because that's another huge difference of the image the British people might have when talking about right-wing reactionaries. We're talking about a very young movement. How difficult is that demographic feature of it?
Again, we're talking about 6 million people overall, but still it's significant insofar as AfD has managed to be massively successful on TikTok, mostly, which is used by younger Germans as much as by younger Brits. And the mainstream parties have not really managed to get that quickly. They didn't clock that fast enough. And when they started to try to get in there, it was far too late. And that's why the younger generation that is still in these states, many of the young ones have left and made it to the West somewhere. But those who are still there, they feel left behind is always such a cliche, but they feel left alone. And AfD has been offering support, has been offering youth organizations. In nowhere than in Germany, these far-right organizations have so much sort of dominated the center of society as they have in East Germany. And that's why the youth has also been voting for them massively. And I personally think this is one of the most worrying features in yesterday's elections.
Now, I was looking at Jonas Scheible from Der Spiegel. He was saying that the CDU's ratings have actually gone down, their popularity ratings, but that because the coalition parties have collapsed, a lot of people have voted for the CDU as the only party that can sort of limit the AfD's power. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at the who voted for whom and who had voted for whom before, you clearly see that a lot of the underlying subtext of these elections is that East Germans, and I think that is something you would find in the rest of Germany as well, are hugely dissatisfied with the current coalition government that is basically dysfunctional. So what first and foremost happened, if we take away for a moment or just leave to the side for a moment the AfD's victory here, what happened mostly is that these parties didn't get any votes anymore. It's really quite shocking. The Liberals, who are one of the three parties of the coalition government, didn't even make it above 5%, so they won't be even in the government. The Greens just so made it in one of the two states in Saxony. The SPD, one of the big tent parties, the Labour Party of Germany, got 6% in Thuringia, 7% in Saxony, and they were even relieved about it. Imagine that. So to have more than 5% and that way still being at least represented in parliament. And that is, I think, the most worrying thing in a way, that the Social Democrat, Green, Liberal coalition has imploded in these elections. And I think that's why so many people who would maybe before have voted for the coalition parties, who would normally not have voted for the conservative Christians, but didn't want to vote for the far-right AfD, voted for the CDU, but it wasn't a real heartfelt vote for them. So this is very volatile. So that's true, that assessment. I don't think this is a solid base the Christian conservatives can stand on when it comes next year to the national elections.
Because also, not to spread gloom on you, if we look at the European Parliament election results this summer, actually the AfD won every region in former East Germany
Hmm.
by quite a bit more, as it were. So this result, especially narrowly losing in Saxony, represents a slight falling back of their support.
Yes and no. I mean, I think these two state elections yesterday will destabilize German politics, national politics, more than the result of the European elections, because these state parliaments are more influential in Berlin, as well as, again, Germany is such a federal state. I think you shouldn't overdo it. As I said, this is East Germany. There are specific reasons why East Germany votes for that. There's a huge discussion going on in Germany at the moment about that. And this is in no way representative of the whole of Germany.
Yeah.
And I do not expect, and nobody expects, the national elections next year to end up in a similar way. So that's something I think it's maybe important to say for a British audience. It's not all of Germany. Germany isn't turning into a Nazi state again, but it is a dangerous first that a far-right extremist party can win with a landslide in a state election, come first in a landslide in such a state election. That's the first time this has happened since 1945. And the big question now is what this kind of earthquake and shock that it has been, if you look into the German papers this morning, what that will do to the national debate and how much it will undermine the stance of the mainstream parties, and especially of the Christian conservatives who are in danger of learning the wrong lessons out of their survival here and pandering further to the right. And how that ends, we have seen that with the Tories in Britain.
I noticed that you shared a quote by songwriter and East German political dissident Wolf Biermann. Die zu feige waren in der Diktatur, rebellieren jetzt ohne Risiko gegen die Demokratie.
Wow, you
so
speak
those
German.
who are a little. So those who were too cowardly to stand up to dictatorship are now rebelling against democracy with no risk. And I wanted to ask, reunification of West and East Germany was not without sacrifices and economic pain.
No.
Is there now a sense of resentment that former East Germany has in a way infected German politics? Is there a danger that German unity could start to fall apart in a more profound way?
Well, I do not think that German unity will fall apart in any way. I do think that East Germany has been particularly prone to authoritarian thinking. And that cannot just be explained from resentments that certainly are there, and from East Germany doing economically less well than the West, which, by the way, isn't the case anymore very much. If you look at the numbers today, East Germany is doing actually rather well. The average wages are still below the West German wages, but it's by no means an impoverished, left behind region anymore. And most East Germans that have been asked during all the documentaries that have been made before these elections, they always said, no, I'm personally quite well off, but. And there is quite a big discussion also between East Germans going on at the moment about why East Germans have then been proven to be so much more prone to this kind of thinking. And there is a new book that became an instant bestseller that I personally do find really interesting, and that I've just read here in these 2 weeks of holidays I had in Berlin, which is called Freiheitsschock, Freedom Shock, by an East Berliner historian, Ilko Sascha Kowalczuk, quite a difficult name to pronounce. And he basically says, yes, the West has in a very unsensitive way colonialized, taken over the East after 1989, but that's what the East Germans wanted themselves. They wanted the D-Mark. They wanted a good car, which wasn't a Trabi anymore. So they shouldn't now paint themselves into the victim corner. But they should acknowledge, and I find that quite interesting, they should acknowledge that they have sort of confused or confounded the state with society after 1989. I mean, in the GDR, in a dictatorship, there is no difference between state and society, whereas in a democracy, especially in a liberal democracy, that comes with a heavy price to pay, because you have to renegotiate a societal contract again and again. And that is something that a lot of East Germans, that's his analysis, haven't ever really done. So they expect the state to take care of them as it did before, and complain about having to do so much themselves now. And this kind of mental laziness, he analyzes, led them to sort of imagine a GDR as a safe, rosy state it really never was. And that's what exactly the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht are tapping into now. So this is an interesting debate that has started now. As I said, mostly an East German debate. I mean, within East German publicists and historians, and that will be interesting to see how this goes on, because it's probably has been neglected. And he says this mental state of, he calls this the Diktatursozialisation, which is a socialization in a dictatorship, that has never been properly addressed and dismantled. And that is part of the problem why in East Germany these parties are so strong, and why, as he analyzes it, they are infecting the rest of Germany with that now.
And the other very interesting feature, exactly along the same lines, is that those two regions have the lowest proportion of immigrants in all of Germany. So
Yes.
the two regions that have the most anxiety about immigration have actually the lowest rates of immigration, and by a long, long way.
I mean, that's not really anything new. I remember Woody Allen having said anti-Semitism works best without Jews. So that's, yeah.
Now, okay, to wrap this up, how does this affect Berlin, do you think? I know it's a difficult thing to ponder, but there's another state election in Brandenburg in 3 weeks' time. It will be interesting to see how percentages move there given this result. And the next federal election in Germany is not scheduled until September 2025, exactly a year.
Basically in a year, yeah.
So does Scholz soldier on, knowing that there are large parts of the country in which he has no support? Is there any possibility of an early election? What happens?
Okay, we Germans do not do early elections if not absolutely necessary. These coalition governments we're quite used to normally stumble on, even if they are half falling apart until the very end. And I'm absolutely sure that that's what Olaf Scholz intends to do. However, if the next East election in Brandenburg in 3 weeks' time, on the 22nd of September, I think, will be as awful and dangerous for the Social Democrats as this one, and that's a possibility, they come in below the 5% threshold that is necessary to be part of the parliament at all, I think then within the Social Democratic Party, Olaf Scholz's future will be heavily discussed. So for him, it will be quite important whether the SPD, his party, survives at all in this third East German election in 3 weeks' time, and his fate will hang on that. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure that they will soldier on till next year, unless somebody totally loses his or her nerves. The discussions have been quite heated this morning in between the different politicians and different figureheads of the coalition parties. This is a very volatile situation this week, and it's hard to predict, but my guess is that the coalition government will sort of soldier on, but Olaf Scholz's fate very much hangs on the third election, end of September.
Excellent point in which to end it. Annette Dittert, thank you so much for helping our listeners understand the situation a bit better. We will have you on the full show very soon, and I look forward
Thank you so much for having me. I love your pod. I told you so before, but it's a great thing to listen to, and I'm very much looking forward to coming in person when I'm back in London.
Thank you, that's lovely. If you appreciate Quiet Riot as much as it appreciates you, and you think the work we do is worth doing, you can now support us. Indeed, you should. Head over to Ko-fi or Ko-fi, that's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, and you can make a one-off donation or take up a monthly subscription. Keep safe, keep sane. This is Alex Andreou. Speak soon.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads, with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sanguita, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet.